All right, hello everyone, and welcome back again. Today we're going to talk about what America was like following World War One, and some of the things that Americans are going to face and how they're going to feel in a post-World War One United States. So here are the objectives and standards again. We are going to describe how life changed for Americans after World War One, and examine how Americans came to distrust immigrants and their fear of immigration. So we're going to look at how Americans kind of have a little bit of a fear and change of feelings towards foreigners. And there are our standards as well. Okay, our vocabulary preview. Again, we will go over these words in the lesson, but I just want to present them to you ahead of time. They are nativism, communism, and anarchist. Okay, our central question. So, how did Americans react and treat foreigners after World War One? So that's the question I want you to be thinking about as you go through this lesson. Okay, so I'd also like you to think about this. What are some reasons why people may be opposed to immigration? And what are some reasons why people may be in support of immigration? And you can use some personal experiences that you may have with this. I'm just looking for your opinion on it, and I'd like to see you answer both questions. Why would people be opposed to it, and why would people be in support of it as well? Okay, so life after the war. So after World War I, Americans found themselves facing hard times. The economy was weak and the economy was trying to readjust. Soldiers returning from war also faced limited jobs and unemployment. And they also faced the memories of war and had to deal with becoming known as shell shock. This is still true today for a lot of soldiers who come home from war. They have to um, deal with the memories and the situations they dealt with over in foreign countries or in difficult situations during war. So this is very true for today. Um, those who could find work took jobs away from minorities and women who had held those positions during the wars. Remember, during the war, a lot of women went to work in factories or in other jobs or occupations. So when the soldiers come home from war and they want their jobs back, obviously, a lot of these women are going to be you know tossed out from their jobs that they had during the war. Also, factories and farms suffered because during the war, factories and farms were producing, machinery and weapons and iron and steel, and farms were producing food and things like that. So after the war, that production is not needed anymore. So they kind of suffer as well. So it was a difficult time for a lot of Americans. Okay, nativism and isolationism. So many Americans are going to respond to this stress by blaming outsiders or foreigners. So people who, are immigrants or whatever the case may be. And this prejudice against foreign-born people is called nativism. Okay, so that's going to come about a lot during the 1920s. It always kind of been around America at different points, but it's going to come about again in the 1920s after World War One. So isolationism, you may remember from before the United States got into World War One. It's wanting to kind of stay out of foreign affairs and worry about your own self and your own country. So a lot of Americans after World War One and seeing the horrors of World War One kind of want to return to that isolationism uh, policy again. So fear of communism creates a Red Scare. So one major fear of Americans was the spread of communism. So communism, I'm sure some of you are aware or may have heard of it before, is an economic and political system based on a single party government ruled by a dictatorship. Okay? So after revolutionaries in Russia overthrew the Tsar and the government um, during World War One, supporters of communism began waving their communist red flag and calling for an end to capitalism worldwide. Okay, so this kind of scares a lot of people around the world, including the United States. Besides that, a communist party is going to be formed in the United States with 70,000 members. And this frightens a lot of people too, that so many people are in favor of this communist belief system. Um, Several bombs are going to be mailed to government offices and businesses, And as this happens, as these bombs are mailed, the American public begins to grow very fearful of communism and afraid that maybe communists are trying to overthrow the government or take over the country. The Palmer raids. So in August 1919, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, he's going to use agents to hunt down suspected communists, socialists, and anarchists. Now, anarchists, in case you don't know what that word means or unsure of it, are people who oppose any form of government. So they don't want any government. They just think people should kind of rule themselves and, control themselves. Okay? Um, Palmer is going to use these agents to go into people's homes, to go into people's businesses, and they're going to ignore civil rights, and they raid people's homes and businesses. And hundreds of foreign-born radicals are going to be deported without a trial. So they don't even get a trial, which is basically against a lot of the stuff that our country stands for. And if you ever heard the name J. Edgar Hoover, who becomes the future FBI director in later years, and his name will come up again in our course, this is where he starts to come to fame a little bit, is during the Palmer raids as well. Just a little side note there. But anyway, the Palmer raids are going to fail to turn up any real evidence of a communist conspiracy. So there's no real evidence that communists are trying to overthrow the government. So while the people kind of supported this idea at first of the Palmer raids, Americans are going to soon turn their back on it. They don't believe it's doing any good for anybody. Okay, so Sacco and Vanzetti. So although the Palmer raids and Red Scare were short-lived, remember, people, kind of believed in those things, and they kind of, you know, not brush them aside, but they kind of move on with their lives. But Americans are still fearful of foreigners. Okay, and two of these gentlemen, whose picture you'll see here, are Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, and I'm doing my best with their names. They are Italian immigrants and anarchists. So again, anarchists are people who don't believe in any type of government, and they are Italian. And they also avoided the World War I draft in America, so that doesn't make a lot of Americans very happy either. But their story is that they were arrested and charged with robbery and murder. Now, both these gentlemen are going to proclaim their innocence, but due to the time and people are afraid of foreigners and distrustful of immigrants during this time, a lot of witnesses say that they know for a fact they were Italians who robbed and murdered. A lot of the evidence is kind of put it against them. That's not really fair. The judge is kind of biased as well. So either way, they're both found guilty and they are sentenced to death. Now, before they're executed, there are protests around the country and the world calling it an unfair trial, like I just said, for all those reasons. Okay, but unfortunately, both men were executed in 1927 for a crime that they possibly did not commit. I don't know if I heard any other evidence since then that whether they were guilty or not. I know they looked into it later on if they did do it or not, but I honestly don't know if they found the evidence that they did or not do it. And maybe something you want to look up in your free time if you get a chance. But either way, this just goes to show you that there was a lot of anti-immigrant and foreigner fear in this country during the time. They were basically executed because of Americans' fears of them. Okay, so less immigration. So anti-immigrant attitudes had been around the country for a while, up until the 1920s. Some people worried that immigrants would come in and take jobs. A lot of times immigrants would come into America and take jobs for a lower pay, so to speak, and people were more likely to hire them because they could pay them at a lower rate. So a lot of Americans are unhappy about that because they're taking jobs. And other people are worried that, again, immigrants could be radicals and trying to come to the country to overthrow the government. So people are still fearful of that. And then there's other groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan, which you may or may not have heard of before either, who organized marches and violent attacks against immigrants, but also African Americans and those of different religious faiths as well. So those types of groups are also going to reemerge during this time period. Okay, so the quota system. So from 1919 to 1921, immigrants had grown from 141,000 to 805,000 in population. That's a lot, guys. That's a lot of immigrants, people coming into our country. So due to the pressure from nativists and from Americans, Congress decides to limit the number of immigrants that are going to come into the United States. So the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 set a maximum number of people allowed from each foreign country to enter the United States. Okay, so we're going to put a limit on immigration, how many people come from certain countries. Okay, it mainly restricted immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, and for some reason it didn't allow for any Japanese immigrants. It didn't allow for any Japanese immigrants to come to America, which is going to anger the Japanese. Okay, so I wrap up. So after World War I, Americans are left struggling. Okay, a lot of factories and businesses were struggling. People were unable to find jobs. Soldiers were coming home from war with the stresses of being in war. So a lot of Americans are on edge and stressed. And to kind of help them cope with this, a lot of Americans turn to blame immigrants for the situation. You have A. Mitchell Palmer there, who's the Attorney General who did the Palmer raids, and looking for suspected communists and socialists and anarchists. And then you have Sacco and Vanzetti, who were accused of robbery and murder and eventually sentenced to death and executed for something they may or may not have done. So as a result of all this fear and pressure, Congress decided to put a limit on immigration. Okay? So everyone, that's all I have for today. Tomorrow or the next lesson, we will talk about the other political atmosphere of the 1920s and some different things going on with the presidency. So please make sure you answer any questions after this lesson, and talk to you soon.